In my previous life, my husband Edward Wilson had saved me first because I was pregnant. By the time he turned back to save his childhood friend, Jessica Mitchell, Jessica had already been bitten by a viper. Edward had hated me ever since. A month later, I was chained up in a secret room with hundreds of vipers roaming the floor. I screamed for help in terror, but Edward's grim voice came from outside the door. He said, "Elizabeth, you asshole. You got Jessica killed, and I'm going to give you a taste of what it's like to be bitten by vipers." In the end, I was bitten by hundreds of vipers, and my body was eaten up. Opening my eyes again, I went back to the day of the encounter. There was a sharp pain coming from my body, and I slowly opened my eyes to find myself at the bottom of a cliff in the forest. If it weren't for the soft dirt beneath me, I would have died. I was a guide at Alpha Mount Forest Park and was 12 weeks pregnant. I was supposed to be resting at home, but my husband, Edward Wilson, insisted that I be a guide for his childhood friend, Jessica Mitchell. I was furious. "I'm pregnant now. Why are you making me give Jessica a tour guide?" Edward said, "If Jessica's personal tour guide hadn't had a temporary commitment, I wouldn't be asking you to do this, Elizabeth. Besides, you're only 12 weeks pregnant. It won't hurt." I got angry and said angrily, "I'm not going." "Go or get a divorce," said Edward. I could only compromise. In my previous life, I had taken Jessica walking in the safety of the forest park. But she took advantage of my inattention and ran into the primitive forest of Alpha Mount, which was infested with poisonous insects, miasma, and crisis. I couldn't leave her alone and had to chase after her. When I came to a cliff, Jessica said that there seemed to be a person at the bottom of the cliff, so I went over to look. But she suddenly pushed me off the cliff. Jessica said, "Elizabeth, go to hell. As long as you die, I can be with Edward." Luckily, the bottom of the cliff was soft dirt, and I survived. I endured the excruciating pain and groped for half an hour on the ground full of rotten and withered leaves before I finally found the micro-recorder. In my previous life, after I awakened, I had been eager to save myself. Only after I was saved did I realize that the micro-recorder was gone. Without the micro-recorder, no matter how I explained the truth, Edward just didn't believe me. I took a closer look at the micro-recorder and was relieved to find that it was not broken. I had a habit of taking the recorder with me when I did one-on-one guided tours so that I could have proof if something happened that I couldn't explain. The one thing I could be sure of now was that Jessica had dared to kill me in the primeval forest because she had traveled this road with her private guide. But she overestimated herself. The primeval forest of Alpha Mount was like a labyrinth. Even if she had walked through dozens of times, she would still get lost, let alone without a guide, which was why she was also in danger. After I bandaged my injured leg at the bottom of the cliff, I immediately followed the route I had taken in my previous life to leave the mountain. In this life, I didn't want anything to do with Edward and wouldn't ask him for help. Coming to the tree I had seen in my previous life, I realized that there were two paths in front of me. In my previous life, I chose the left one, which led to getting lost before I asked Edward for help. In this life, I chose the right path and headed for the right side. After I had walked 1,250 yards, there was a sudden chill of cold air in front of me, and then I realized that a white mist had risen from the ground. I hastily retreated. The white mist was miasma, and I would die if I inhaled it. I was forced to the tree again. Looking at the time, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. Alpha Mount would be dark by 5. At night, Alpha Mount was infested with poisonous insects and wild animals, and it was very cold. It would be dangerous for me to lose my warmth. I had no choice but to take the left side of the road. After an hour or so, it was dark. I climbed up a tree and looked for a signal source. At this time, my cell phone battery was only 2% left. Luckily, as in my previous life, I got through to Edward at the last minute. "Edward, I'm in distress, probably southeast of Alpha Mount, within 9,100 yards upstream of Snake Lake. Come and help me," I yelled. Edward said, "How could you, as a veteran guide at Alpha Mount, not get out? You're such a vicious woman. How dare you take Jessica into the primeval forest of Alpha Mount? Do you want to kill Jessica? I know what's in your mind. Don't pretend to be lost. I'll settle the score with you when you get out. Right now, I'm going to save Jessica." With that, Edward hung up. I froze. What was going on? In my previous life, he would have obviously come to my rescue first, and he didn't say those words. After thinking for a moment, I suddenly understood. Edward had also been reborn. This time, he chose to save Jessica first. I tried to call the rescue center, but my phone was dead. I felt a wave of fear enveloped me. On all sides were interlocking and strange trees, and the weird noises were emanating from the gloom. I couldn't delay any longer and had to get out of the mountain quickly. At the moment, I was lost in reverse, but I had to keep going. My injured leg went from pain to numbness. As I walked, it got dark. I was exhausted. The water and food in my backpack had been eaten up by Jessica not long into the primeval forest of Ailfa Mount. I sat on the ground panting heavily as the temperature reached 23 degrees Fahrenheit and the branches of the trees lit up with eerie silver lights. They were night birds staring at me. In the distance, there was a horrible hissing of wild animals. I was a bit desperate, not knowing whether I would get out alive. Just then, a few lights penetrated through. It was the rescue team coming. Elizabeth, why aren't you out yet? The two team members who came, Henry Carter and Kevin Parker, were Edward's men. Henry, Kevin, it's good you're here. Hurry up and get me out of here, I said breathlessly. But we have a mission. Edward told us to search and rescue Jessica, said Henry. Aren't you guys going to rescue me? I questioned. At that moment, Henry's satellite phone rang, and it was Edward calling. Edward asked, "Did you two find Jessica?" Henry replied, "Edward, we didn't find Jessica, but we did find Elizabeth. Should we take Elizabeth out first? Don't bother with her. She's just trying to delay you guys from getting to Jessica. You guys hurry and head downstream to Snake Lake," said Edward anxiously. Henry, Kevin, I'm really dying. Why don't one of you two take me out first, and the rest of you keep looking for Jessica?